Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald!
From inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal. From inside the centre. Foul. I can't believe
that. Good time of day, everyone. Welcome to episode 194 of Americans Watching the Footy, our round 20 preview. I am Benjamin Castle coming to you from San Diego, and my brother Ethan is about to not be in South San Francisco. He won't be by the time you hear this.
But I am for now. And I am, of course. You'll have to find out when I get there. Unless you were trying to prompt me to say to Connecticut. Gonna be another, very niche overlap. But if anyone here, anyone listening to this is familiar with No Fucking Baby, that would be awesome. I mean, frankly, I think he should be, way bigger than Hasbulla. But that's just me.
Yeah, so on this New England Spooktacular, Ethan will be completing his Major League Ballpark quest. He'll be finally going to Fenway.
And I'll also be getting states 45, 46, and 47.
What have you yet to do? Alaska and what else?
After this trip, I'll still be missing Louisiana and Oklahoma.
I guess it's fitting that around where one of us is on the move starts with Carlton and Port, because that's the way it was a little under 2 months ago now, when these teams met in round 12. As this game was finishing up, I was getting on the road to drive down to San Diego, where I still am. This reverse fixture will be another weeknight meeting, although Friday night is weekend, but you get the point. 7:40 p.m. local, so 7:10 p.m. South Australian time. Americans could watch on FS2 at 5:40 a.m. Eastern, 2:40 a.m. Pacific.
Yeah, one of the things I'm not looking forward to with this round is Eastern Time footy. Should be my last Eastern Time footy experience of the year, barring something unpredictable.
I don't know, I like the idea of sunrise footy, but you're not nearly as much of a morning person as I am.
It's also just you get up for it, and afterwards it's 8 a.m. and it's I'm not checking out of my hotel for a couple hours. What am I going to do here, But that first meeting was a pretty interesting one. Carlton started hot and finished hot, an 8-3 fourth quarter, one of the best quarters of Patrick Cripps' career.
I remember that game just being really sloppy at the start of the first 3 quarters, despite it being completely dry, like the inside of Phil Swift's boat.
Did you see the guy who left OxyClean at Billy Mays' grave?
I will now.
If we're talking infomercials, that has to be mentioned.
It's not clean unless it's OxyClean.
Yeah, I remember that game, and, that weekend really being the round of, insane fourth quarters, because the next night Marcus Bontempelli had an even better fourth.
I also remembered that Carlton kept an eye and a damper on Dan Houston and Kane Farrell. That responsibility went to Zach Williams and Lockie Fogarty. Now, I don't expect those two to have those responsibilities again. Well, Williams is still out with his hamstring injury, but Fogarty was so effective on a per-touch basis. I believe half of his disposals this past week were either goals or direct assists. I would like to see David Cunningham have a responsibility.
See, that's tricky because I think of Cunningham as playing in the defensive half. Usually Houston is in the defensive half and towards the middle. So you'd have Cunningham playing a bit out of position in order to make that happen.
I just want to keep Fogarty as a more available player offensively, but I think Cunningham, at least some cameos as that defensive forward, could work. It's also complicated by the fact that the Blues could have some significant defensive outs based on which of Jordan Boyd, Caleb Marchbank, and Mitch McGovern can or can't go. They're also waiting on Blake Acres' status. We do know for sure, though, Mark Pitnet will get his opportunity because Tom DeKoning, ouch. I don't know how he played through the game this past Sunday as much as he did.
It's quite a nasty combo. Broken foot and collapsed lung, which did not happen on the same play, I believe.
DeKoning, though, was having lung and chest difficulties for much of the game. Not sure what was going on with the Blues doctors that night between that and not getting Harry Mackay off for 6 minutes. It's fitting, though, that Carlton doctors are under the spotlight in the week that they're playing Port.
See, I feel like with 3 different teams having to explain what the hell their doctors were doing this past week, Port's probably just sitting there like, damn, everyone's just trying to copy us.
Mark Fisher, you're an inspiration. For the Blues, you also could see Brody Kemp returning, considering the defensive outs in addition to Sam Durden, whose nickname is Smashing.
Blah.
I mean, he's a dead ringer for a real-life Nigel Thornberry.
Also, Jackson Binns, who seems like he's always kind of in this position, kind of stuck, between being really good in the VFL and trying to get an AFL game. A nice little 47 disposal, 3-goal performance in the VFL last week.
Considering the defensive outs and his ability to play outside from the back, that's a necessary recall there. Could see him get some wing time as well if Akers doesn't go.
That was against Collingwood, by the way. I don't get why again, this is another one of those where the VFL and AFL schedules don't really line up together. I find the whole VFL scheduling process very, very confusing, by the way. Port Adelaide had a bunch of casualties back in round 18. Could get Lockie Jones back from concussion, could get Kane Farrell back from his hamstring, and I think the most important of those, Todd Marshall coming back off his hip injury, possibly. Also could see maybe Ryan Burton get back in, although with how good Logan Evans has been moving the ball out the back, I don't know how that would work. Maybe that would allow Evans to play further up the ground or something.
I'm not sure. It was mentioned in the In the Mix article, and I am not a fan of the idea. No offense, Ryan Burton, but Logan Evans was a clear second in the Rising Star race this week, so keep him in that role. Marshall being in will just provide extra tall cover with Ollie Lord struggling and us not expecting Charlie Dixon to kick 4 goals again. Well, of course, depending on Carlton's outs. Maybe this is just a game where Port's talls cook. Either that or Nick Newman would need to have a more prominent one-on-one assignment. He's usually type that plays off Wiedering and those top one-on-one guys as an accelerator of play from the back. But I think more defensive responsibility for him is necessary this week.
Hard to believe that considering how bad Carlton was for a while now, looking at his AFL tables page, Jacob Wiedering is a career 67 and 107 with 1 draw. Yeah, it's funny because now we just think of him as a winning player.
The Blues are 14.5-point favorites despite the injury outs. I'm not going to do anything on this game even after I see what the outs are. I would back in the Blues to win at home, but I think
I would probably, to actually set a point spread, wait to see what teams look like, which, they'll probably be figured out by the time we release this. I think I do feel pretty safe taking them in terms of just straight up to win the game.
One concern will be the short turnaround, though, because Sunday evening to Friday night is an extremely short turnaround at this point in the AFL season. And just overall, I'm surprised the scheduling is the way it is. I thought they would try to avoid 5-day turnarounds at all costs.
But then they have a longer turnaround heading into the Collingwood game. So I guess it works out, kind of.
As if they'll need that. Well, I mean, Collingwood will be motivated enough for that.
North Melbourne taking on Geelong in a weird standalone early Saturday game.
This is the matchup you choose for it.
I mean, personally, I'm not complaining.
I am, because you had the chance to have another standalone Q clash.
Well, if we play like shit, I'll be complaining that everyone was watching it.
Well, the line, I must say, is smaller than most of the Geelong North matchups I can remember. 24.5 in the Cats' favor out at Blundstone Arena.
Currently the longest head-to-head winning streak now that Port Adelaide's run against the Suns is over. Cats have won 12 straight meetings. This will be the 3rd straight time North has hosted Geelong down at Blundstone, and it'll be the 4th time since 2019 these teams have doubled up. Played back in round 5 at Geelong. Cats won by 75. Connor O'Sullivan and Shannon Neal got games. Both were good. Brian Myers had a huge first half, and Tanner Bruin was really sharp, and he could be back this week, which would be huge.
That's unnecessary, and I don't know why he was kept down in the first place when the focus all along should have been on the ground game and the late ins of Brandon Parfit and Ted Closey, who needs to get a run in 22, by the way. We're definitely more ground-oriented.
I understand why he give him a game to get back in the twos, and you don't expect it to be as much of a disaster of a game as it was last week. So I had nothing wrong with giving him a VFL game, even though it was a wrist injury. So you would think, running and stamina and stuff would be all right. I still thought, let him just get back up to speed and get acclimated. So I wasn't bothered by that. I was bothered by just like everything else.
I would expect Shannon Neal to come back in, considering the drier conditions. It'll be cold, but dry on Saturday afternoon. Partly cloudy, just winter in Tasmania. And then Reece Stanley has been talked about as a potential inclusion, along with a whole host of changes actually in the middle of the ground, depending on how much of a mulligan Chris Scott and company want to give players from that just miserable conditions game.
Well, I would think Parfitt's definitely out. I would be shocked if Zach Toohey doesn't get managed. We'll see if they work Jai Clark back in. Mitch Nevitt definitely struggled a bit, but I would still back him in for another chance. I still think at some point you want to rest Ollie Dempsey, and he was definitely down this past week, but it's getting to the point where he's just getting into the habit of playing every game. So it's like, what do you do there at this point?
Also, you can't sleep on North. I would give North a 1 in 6 chance of pulling this off.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I don't think they're going to take him lightly. I think there's an awareness at this point this North team is competitive.
No clear indication of any changes in the negative direction for North because Curtis Taylor's calf injury was in the reserves, but Will Phillips and Jaden Stevenson could come back in. I think Phillips would be a nice one to test Myers or Dempsey, but I just haven't seen Grind cope with a tag before. And then Blake Drury, who you almost met last year, had 3 goals. I believe Drury was in town along with Sheasel and Tristan Cherry, and was there another?
I think so. Let me check Instagram. Hold on.
Was it George?
I don't think so, but let's find out.
It was those 3 players, Coach Clarkson, and someone else at Stanford.
It was Wardlaw. Shit.
And then also you didn't manage to see those Bulldogs players when you were at the Cardinals-Ravens game.
Yeah, that one, it's a bigger crowd. I'm less bothered by that.
I'm tempted to go a couple hours north to the LA Dragons grand final viewing party this year, not just because our friend Rick might be there, but also because they've got some AFL players there in the past. I think Tim Taranto had been a guest there before, but we'll definitely be more on top of AFL players' off-season travels this year.
I've now been to multiple establishments that I know Charlie Cameron went to when he visited San Francisco a couple of years ago. And I believe Hayden Young might have been at that Ravens-Cardinals game as well.
Wow, so you barely missed interactions with a few of your absolute favorite non-cats. As we mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Q-Clash 27 is not standalone because we've got 2 middle Saturday games this week going right up against each other at 4:35 p.m. local, 2:35 a.m. Eastern, 11:35 p.m. Pacific Friday night for Americans. Q-Clash 27 will be on Fox Sports 2. And you remember the craziness of the last Q-Clash, Ethan?
Of course, it was the Logan Morris game.
It was also Bruce Reville's debut, but yes, Morris was the sub. A late change to be the sub in the first place after playing a full game in the VFL and getting Macca's. We know all about that.
Pretty sure it was one of those, like similar to Riley Garcia a couple weeks ago, like you're only getting in if someone's hurt, and then someone got hurt.
And then 2 other Lions got hurt. 2 ACLs and a concussion in that game. Morris, the sub, after having played a complete game earlier in the day and not even having his own cleats, didn't matter. They got out to enough of a margin in the first half and ground the game to a halt in the third quarter in front of a Q-Clash record crowd of over 30,000.
I think at some point we might need to make the anniversary of that game Logan Morris Day, where you have to wear shoes a size too small for you and eat McDonald's.
Let's team up with Egg Footy to make it happen. Now, the Lions defense has injuries this week too, to the point that they have 1 key defender from this past weekend. Harris Andrews is concussed, improper assessment during the game. Dara Joyce broke his jaw. Good luck, Froggy.
I saw some talk about, do you swing a tall forward back like possibly Eric Hipwood? This is also where Darcy Gardner being out for the season really hurts. I think the issue is, you got to find a way to match up with both King and Lukosius, although Lukosius does more full field stuff. What I think I'd do with Ben King is just adjust your game plan off of if he hits his first shot.
He's suddenly like his twin brother in that regard.
If you saw him this past week.
I hate saying this after he hit the game-winning goal, but I think this would mean Kalachi has to pitch in a lot more defensively, which he's capable of doing.
I think the best option is just roll with your actual defenders and give up the size rather than swing a forward back. At least make that the initial plan. And then if you need to, you switch a couple guys around and emphasize that positional versatility.
Right. That's a phrase that Chris Fagan used in the summer to describe this team, and it's been very necessary. Jackson Pryor's one that could easily come in as a more medium-sized defender. In terms of the tall stocks, though, there's not really much left unless you're going for a potential debut for Double Z, Zane Zakostelski. You know, he hasn't been a super high disposal player in the twos, so I wouldn't normally expect it, but I wonder if duty calls this week.
I want something very stupid to happen. Let Joe Danaher play defense.
I could just see this going completely haywire, like Starcevic ending up on Jed Walter or something like that. There'll be a magnified role for Shadow Brain out of necessity, and he had an excellent fourth quarter, including a couple key intercept marks and a spoil that caused a Sharon to go on to the injury list while Harris Andrews was off the oval getting assessed. Yeah, scans confirmed deep tissue bruising and a bladder infection for that Sharon following Brain's forceful spoil.
So with the Suns, we know that Jared Witz is a test. Malcolm Roses should be suspended way longer, but he's available. And then Thomas Berry and Braden Fiorini have been decent down on the twos. We'll see if Hardwick wants to shake things up yet again after another really shitty road performance. I would actually consider, if Witz could go, considering the lack of talls that the Lions have, maybe play both Witz and Moyle and have one of them go forward to really try to just overwhelm them with size? Is that a crazy suggestion?
Are you suggesting Witz, Moyle, and Walter all play?
Yes. I am not suggesting Coconuts migrate. I mean, just like going with the tallest team possible has worked for the Bulldogs at times. Why not?
Anything to keep that home perfection alive, despite the Lions being 5.5-point favorites. The actual look of the team being named for Brisbane will be so fascinating. I would expect Logan Morris to come back in after Henry Smith had a quiet debut. I mean, I think Smith could stay in as well, just because they need size. Maybe, is there a way to get Darcy Ford involved so that maybe you can free up McInerney to go play in different spots? Maybe that's the key, is having McInerney moonlight as a defender. He's capable of it. I mean, no Ruck is able to go back in defense as well as Max Gawn, but McInerney is capable in a similar way.
See, again, this is one of those situations where if there was like a waiver system, you know, you would have a claim for some guy who's like been absolute dog shit for some other team, and then he gets a chance to redeem himself. And either he completely redeems himself and is an awesome story, or it's just like, yeah, that's why he was available.
Or just someone on a VFL list who hasn't made a debut yet.
I would think of more like a Rule 5 type situation. So basically the Rule 5 draft in baseball is where you can claim a guy that's been like in a team system forever but hasn't gotten major league time. And it's basically designed to give guys an opportunity that are like stuck behind a really good player at their position.
Because you got to keep them on the active roster, I think, for the whole year.
Yes, that is correct. So basically, like say the Dodgers have a really good first base prospect, but he's stuck behind Freddie Freeman. So if the Dodgers don't add him to their 40-man roster, every other team has a chance to claim the guy in this Rule 5 draft, but then would have to keep him on their active 26-man roster all year. And to answer, there are exceptions. Like if you get hurt, you can still place him on the injured list, yes. But yeah, for guys that are like stuck in the VFL, something like that, like a Rule 5 type thing would be awesome. What might not be so awesome is St. Kilda versus Essendon. The first meeting was a close but not especially good game. I remember being in charge of that one and being kind of excited for it. It was like, well, here's two teams I haven't watched as closely usually. Let's get familiar here. And this was round 3. It was the Easter round. Essendon ended up winning by 4. The only lead change came with 5.5 minutes left. And Nick Martin put up like the emptiest 44 possession game ever.
That's my biggest memory of this game, not the extreme Huddo-gasm that we got when Jake Stringer hit the go-ahead goal.
It's funny because
It's a little bit funny.
at times I've looked at Nick Martin as an accumulator. And then there was the game against Melbourne a couple weeks ago where despite the loss, even before he scored a couple of garbage time goals, I thought he was fucking fantastic. And I've just come to realize that Essendon in particular, and I guess maybe Gold Coast to some extent, but especially Essendon, my evaluations of the team, and especially the individual pieces, don't always line up with everyone else's. In fact, they rarely do. And I think that's kind of fun. And that's part of the reason America's Brownlow exists.
No, the reason America's Brownlow exists is Rowan Marshall.
Yeah, that's part of it too. And that we don't want it to just be the best midfielder award.
Well, it'll end up going to the best midfielder in all likelihood, but you'll see.
Yes, but there will be far more votes for good performances by forwards and defenders. I can tell you that already.
Well, forwards, not just for their goal scoring.
Yeah, like a common thing, and it shouldn't happen in this game considering it's being played at Marvel, as most matchups between these teams are. But like, whenever there's a wet game and there's one forward that plays with a lot of control, like I value that super highly. Speaking of things I value highly, really liked what Liam Henry had done for the Saints this year, and then he damaged his knee cartilage, and now he's done for the year. And Seb Ross is out another 4 to 5 weeks with a calf strain.
That pretty much puts him out for the year then as well, and a lot of Saints fans think they might have seen the last of him.
Where do they think he goes?
Retirement, he's 31.
A true ancient relic.
Again, so many people talk about 30 as this huge cliff. I can think about somebody who dispelled that literally last week for the Saints.
Tim Membry. I don't think he or Cooper Sharman are going to have such good games this week against a pretty complete Essendon defense. Even if Ben Mackay's form has taken a bit of a dive, I still really like what Jordan Ridley and Jaden Laverde had. And as much as this team has struggled, I still like that group defensively. And I like the depth there.
And you've also got other supports there. Nick Cox is useful forward as a capable left-footed kick, but I could see him getting some more defensive time. Xavier Dersma, we've praised for his swingman role recently, and I just like that he actually followed us and responded to our message too. He's cool. His father's cool. Would love to be able to just get to know him and bring him on here at some point. Maybe the whole family, plus Harley if he's still with Yasmin by then.
It would be so funny if it turns out it's not Xavier and his dad is just following someone pretending to be him. I'm 99% sure it actually is him, but it would be hilarious.
Well, considering team accounts are following it as well.
Yeah, I guess.
Some more watches for the Saints, especially with Liam Henry out. You could think this would be another opportunity for Paddy Dow because he's had more an outside job, although he could be a supplementary inner piece too. I think a lot of it depends on where Ross Lyon might want Jack Sinclair to go, because I haven't been as impressed by Sinclair this year. Hasn't done as much in terms of getting into the forward half, and I think they've missed that somewhat. Ethan, do you think Essendon bring Peter Wright back in?
Considering that the offense wasn't the issue last week, I'm going to say no. I think it's more just backing in Nate Caddy than anything else.
The only qualm that I would have is that Todd Goldstein hasn't been stellar. In fact, far from it. So maybe keep Caddy as that number one tall forward option, but Wright as a second forward, second ruck. If that support against Rowan Marshall could be handy.
Matt Guelphy did his hamstring, so he's out 3 to 4 weeks. Jai Caldwell did have an HIA test, and he is cleared to go, so he was subbed out more just, he would have been out for close to the rest of the fourth quarter with just the amount of time that those tests take. And then Darcy Parrish, who had not been playing all that well this year and then had shown a little bit and then did his calf in round 9, could be available. We're not sure he'll be up for selection, but he's at least close.
Listed as a test. I'm not sure if they'd bring him straight back in. I know Essendon fans love him, but I've been waiting for a while, and we both have, for Not Dead Ben to get another shot.
Also, Elijah Sotis, realizing very quickly, like, the upside is definitely there, but he hasn't had much of a chance. Maybe that's someone who, if he doesn't get a shot soon, demands a trade.
Sotis still has 2 more years on his first deal, and Hobbs has 1 more after this. I think Hobbs has been just really shafted by selection a lot. Last played round 10 against North. I see this as another close and somewhat ugly game, and Essendon are favored by 3.5.
I think the odds of this being a close game are pretty good. If it wasn't close, I would have to imagine that would be an Essendon win. Can't really see the Saints winning a blowout. Also just, in part, the style they play.
This is one that Essendon need desperately. In eighth, just every win mattering so much, that this is a game that you would pencil in for them, probably. I must say, thinking again about the Saints, Cooper Sharman's marking ability has become really important.
Yeah, I think he and Membry are going to have their hands full, and that's going to be the key for the Saints, is if those two can impact the game, which, like I said, with Essendon's defensive depth, could be a challenge. 2 games Saturday night. We'll give you one of them now and then give you the other after the break. How's that sound?
Yeah, last time Melbourne and the Giants played, it was wet.
Yeah, that was the Alice Springs game, and it was more than a bit of a letdown. Just the conditions and what it meant with the lack of crowd. Melbourne 5-15-45, GWS 7-5-47. Despite how rough the conditions were, Josh Kelly kicked the winning goal on a couple of bounces from 60 with a little under 3 minutes left, and the Giants had 70 spoils, which was just like a very Sam Taylor game. And he could be back this week, depending on how his ball is.
Right, he was suffering from exploded nut syndrome.
Yeah.
Dick-nanigans.
He hasn't been in since round 15. In the past couple of weeks, the Giants were able to hold up defensively without him. Big games out of Jack Buckley and Connor Iden against the Suns. Buckley the sound one-on-one defending, and Iden with more of the movement.
And a week before that against Richmond, it was a good game for Harry Himmelberg. So they've gotten the right sort of sequencing in terms of like the right guys stepping up at the right time. Because, there's a world where those guys all just have a good game at the same time when Taylor's also healthy. And then those guys happen to have their down games when Taylor's not there. I actually really like what the Giants have done these last couple weeks because it's really been digging deep by committee. I don't think their midfield's been all that great this year, truthfully.
Well, Tom Green's impact has much more been just at the source, but not super efficient. Those next disposals off Green have been key. And Kelly's pitched in, O'Halloran, he was the sub this past week, and I still felt his impact. Finn Callahan could jump into the middle, somewhat of an outside mid job, and he's usually just really clean, but he's also bulked up. And I'm so happy that I've turned you into a complete Finn Callahan believer. No Isaac Cumming, though, for the Giants. He's out for the rest of the home and away, and more than that.
And that's a downer, because I had really liked how he had been, no pun intended, coming along.
Maybe that's an opportunity for Nick Haynes to reemerge at AFL level. He's hardly been cited since he became a father. If you are looking for additional help on the small end, though, maybe you want Toby Green to do more a little further upfield because he's got that ability to push into the center square. Maybe that's an opportunity for Connor O'Sullivan's friend Phoenix Gothard to get his debut because he kicked 4 goals from 19 in the VFL. I remember he was battling mono at the start of the year, and that just delayed things for him, but he's coming along now.
Or as some like to call it, glandular fever.
I have a glandular problem.
Or as others like to call it, the kissing disease.
Max Gawn might be back this week, which, considering Melbourne had as many hitouts to advantage as us last week, that would be huge. Also could get some help on the outside soon with Lockie Hunter returning in the VFL. They have now lost Christian Salem for 3 to 4 weeks, and Colton Tolstrup, in addition to just having a lousy game in his return home last week, also ended up with delayed concussion symptoms. So he might be the biggest loser out of this past round. You know, you get all excited to play in front of all your friends and family, you play poorly, you get subbed out, and you end up with a concussion.
So what's the call here from Melbourne? I mean, you could have Blake House come back in and move around the defensive to halfback bag that's there. I've liked House in defense thus far this year, and he's shown some wing ability in the preseason and the VFL. So if you need some support there, that might work. Although the Langdon and Windsor duo, I think, will be back in form this week. Langdon versus Callahan, though, that would be juicy. on the outside. And maybe you see the Giants consider Ryan Angwin to match up on the other side, considering Melbourne's move toward the outside since Petrarca's injury.
Yeah, I mean, the appeal of Angwin, I think, is really about that he's a high-energy kind of spark plug guy.
That could work to counter some of the outside play, because he can follow there.
I don't think he's who I would go with, because I just haven't been all that impressed with him this year. I think the Giants have plenty of options, and he's a little bit deeper on the list. And I'm loving what they've done with the younger guys lately. So if they think Gothard's ready, go with him. Although, despite his low touches once again last week, I liked Aaron Cadman. And I think you might need him out there this week just to occupy Stephen May and try to do some stuff to free up Jesse Hogan. That could be a fun matchup, May versus Hogan.
Tynan Brown's got to be in. There's no excuse there. 11 clearances from 27. That's good in and of itself. 24 fucking tackles. Reminder, the AFL single game record is 20 set by...
Is it Matt Ravel or is it Rory Laird?
It's Laird 2 years ago. Kynan Brown's gotten a couple games into the sub role, and that is it, despite having some huge impact immediately when coming in both times. That physicality is really needed because they've got a good enough number of ball movers there, and they can add him to that mix, but Trent Rivers can't do as much physically as Brown or Neil Bullen can, and with Oliver being down, he's just the right one to throw in there, and it's got to happen. It's got to happen.
Who does Toby Bedford go to?
Does he have a tag neutralization assignment and try to cut off Nibbler?
I would think he'll go to him or Rivers, just knowing who's been effective lately.
Well, Bedford would know those guys pretty well, so that'll be fun also. Clayton Oliver was one of the only players who looked like he gave it to him this past week, but wasn't super clean. I think, obviously, there will be some flexibility there to switch on to him if necessary, but I think I'd rather have him start on, I guess Rivers.
I would maybe just let him start without a tag and switch him on to whoever starts hot.
You know, Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
Xavier Dersma followed us on Twitter and interacted with us. You should too. We are at Americans Footy. We're also on YouTube. We're on Instagram. We're on a bunch of sites. And hopefully soon, Benjamin will put out more updates about walking from San Diego to LA. Can you give us a timeline of when we'll have any further news about that? I know you're dealing with a lot of school shit right now, but
sometime early or middle next month, once my fall semester stuff gets finalized, because I've got to wait on both my class schedule and my practicum schedule for wherever I'm going to be observing and doing some student teaching.
Got it.
It'll probably be right around Christmas time, though.
God, I hope it rains the entire time.
Would be a change of pace, at least. Individually, I'm at BenjaminHK01. He's at Castle Media. The executive producer is on Instagram at cat named Brian.
He is also sleeping right next to me again.
Very good. So we have a direct overlap during the middle Saturday window, but we have a 40-minute offset Saturday night because of Western Derby 59. The normal 6:10 p.m. local time start there. So 8:10 p.m. for the Pacific states, 6:10 a.m. Eastern, 3:10 Pacific for Americans. That means I'll be watching the end of this Dockers blowout as the sun's rising.
I just looked up what RAC or RAC is. So they're the sponsor of the Derby. It's the Royal Automobile Club of Western Australia, which, among other things, does car insurance. I had no idea what it was, even though they had their name on the arena in Perth.
Right, that's culturally important for people outside of Western Australia.
Because of how ridiculous videos?
Exactly. And I could totally see the Eagles honoring how ridiculous by scoring exactly 44 points.
That arena has a retractable roof.
I'm not sure if I knew that either, actually. But even with Jake Waterman coming back and Alex Pierce having broken his arm in a different spot, I do not like the Eagles' chances. Now, I said that in round 6 when the Eagles won by 37 and led by 64 three-quarter time, but I see it even less here.
Wasn't that the game where I thought Frio was going to be ready to do?
Was that it? It might have been.
Well, this time they're actually going to be ready to do.
Yeah, again, even with Moose out, they've got Josh Draper, who's played pretty well this year.
It could be a higher scoring game than they're used to playing in because, having to deal with Allen and Waterman and not having Pierce. They definitely didn't need Pierce last week. And this is a matchup they could probably use him much more in. And now they don't have him. And they really have nobody for that to blame but themselves. But yeah, I think they'll be fine. I think they're just deeper and better all around.
One thing that you might forget that really contributed to a bunch of Frio's struggles was not being able to figure out their forward look with Jai Amos out. Now that they and everybody else have realized just how potent Josh Tracy is, that's not really going to be an issue.
I love that I was, as I've been saying, just a couple weeks early to the Josh Tracy is awesome party.
You were as early to the Josh Tracy is amazing party as I was to the Massimo is something special party. Now, the Eagles will definitely have reinforcements, along with Jake Waterman. Elliot Yeo and Matt Flynn are all likely, but Flynn's going to get outdone. He just will by Sean Darcy and Luke Jackson.
Earlier this year, I was thinking about how difficult it was for Sean Darcy to work his way in, and there were times when it was like, how do they even fit both of them? And they've found ways to make it work lately. I mean, facing a team that pretty much didn't have a ruckman last week definitely made that look better, but I think just they've been able to figure out that sort of rotation lately.
Still having Darcy as the primary one there, and whichever one of them is forward more, you would expect Jackson could be very useful in occupying Tom Barris or maybe Jeremy McGovern if McGovern's good to go.
That he's even considered is insane.
He had a cracked rib and a punctured lung 3 weeks ago, and then he drove to Adelaide. His wife met him there, and they drove the rest of the way to Perth to be there for Simpson's farewell.
That is 36 hours of driving. And to put that into perspective, and this is also just a matter of the advantages of America's interstate highway system and stuff, from where I am right now to the White House is only 41 hours, despite being a good bit longer. Yeah, the interstate highway system, it's pretty cool.
I would like to see for the Eagles to mix things up forward. I know they probably want to give Jamie Cripps another shot in the Derby, knowing it could be his last as well. But Tyrell Dewar and Clay Hall could help going from the middle. And then if you want some more tall support and to allow Allen and Jack Williams to do more upfield, then Archer Reed is a possibility. Pick 30. Suddenly the Eagles could have 2 Reeds in at the AFL level. And I remember also the Derby was one of Harley's best games of the year too. 3 goals and some huge contest wins.
Oh yeah, I remember I was not watching that live because of whatever other game was going on, which I don't remember which it was at the moment. But I remember just like the timeline being like nonstop. Oh my God, Harley Reid.
So that went up against Geelong winning at the Gabba.
Ooh, sweet. And it looks like weather for this game should be fine. Looks like there's rain a lot of the week in Perth, but not Friday or Saturday. Melbourne could be pretty wet Saturday, so, I mean, not like there was going to be a big crowd for GWS in Melbourne to begin with, but that could make it even worse.
I imagine, though, the field will not be in a great state because that's just how it is at Optus Stadium. The Dockers are 36.5-point favorites. Sure, why not?
I think it's going to be more like a 25 to 30-point win, because I think they are actually going to have a little bit of trouble stopping Allen and Waterman. But ultimately, this is the superior team.
A Dockers blowout is almost infinitely more likely than an Eagles blowout.
I can see a world where the Eagles do win this game, though, where Kelly and Yo are able to neutralize Young, Brayshaw, Sarong combo.
Reed would have to have a big say there at the source and not get super rattled, which is something that he still had trouble with.
You're going to text me a bunch of times during this game. Just a bit of banter.
It was 1 or 2 years ago where there was that 150-meter penalty. Normal timing on Sunday, beginning with Collingwood and Richmond meeting for the 45th straight time at the G, going back to 1993. No, that was not interrupted by COVID. They played the first game back from COVID in 2020, and it was absolutely putrid.
Oh, what a game that was. What a great game.
I believe it was 5-6 each way.
Must win for Collingwood, obviously. They're kind of in deep shit. I mean, I've still said nobody's going to be out of it for a while out of those like top 14 teams, although I am close to counting the Suns out just with their road performance and the fact that I don't really see a path to 13 wins unless they really step it up.
Come on, step it up.
But yeah, Collingwood would actually be in pretty deep shit if they don't win this one, considering the road ahead for them. Carlton at Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne. I get the feeling you're going to see what Cespedes Barbecue often describes as an angry win. Like when the Dodgers lose a game and then the next day just put up like 15 on an opponent. I think that's what's going to happen here. It's kind of what Sydney did to North a couple weeks ago.
Well, the Pies, they'll probably get Harvey Harrison back in after being managed. Charlie Dean and Lachie Schultz could both be coming off concussions, and Schultz would be an important piece to bring in as well, especially on the pressure side with Beau McCreary still out for at least another week. Collingwood just haven't been able to match up pressure-wise with anybody. That has been such a huge negative for them. I would also strongly advocate for the return of Billy Frampton. Now, Darcy Moore had a good game in defense, but he can't do everything back there, and Frampton's one-on-one skill is still needed, even with a more depleted Richmond look. If things do work defensively, you can swing Frampton forward and try to limit Noah Balta, maybe.
I would just go Frampton for Markov straight up.
I would say maybe Mason Cox could get back in this week after playing in the VFL, but with Richmond's ruck stocks being so depleted, I don't think this is the week.
I think he gets in still. They seem to be backing him in generally, and will try to find a way to incorporate both him and Darcy Cameron.
That would be a very tall look there with him, Cameron, and McStay, as well as Frampton and Kruger. Do you think it might come at Kruger's expense then?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a possibility.
I was so ready for that Ollie Hayes-Brown debut notification, and then we found out he also got concussed because he copped a punch to the eye on accident.
But hey, he didn't pull his quad or something.
Or tear anything at his knee.
Yeah, that's kind of been Richmond's whole thing this year.
None of the injuries that they're dealing with in terms of the immediate are actually knee-related at all. I think, I would hope they're over that, but yeah, no Nike this week. He's concussed.
Yeah, that's significant. I would expect the hitouts to be very lopsided.
There's only so much Samson Ryan and Jacob Kosicki can do.
Better news for Richmond. Tim Taranto should be available coming off his concussion. And then there are chances for a whole bunch of reinforcements, actually, because could get Dustin Martin back. He's kind of been questionable for a minute now. Marlon Pickett, who's been out since round 12. Morris Rioli Jr. has been out since round 9 with what we thought might have been another ACL, but turned out to just be an ankle injury. And Nick Vlastone with a back injury, all possibilities. So this could look like a competenter Richmond team, but again, the Nankervis out is big, and he had been playing really well in the weeks leading up to this, so it's pretty unfortunate timing.
I still want to back in Vlastone just to be that defensive leader for another year or two more, at least.
I'd like to see him eventually pass the torch over these next couple years to Balta and Miller.
And don't forget that there's still Tyler Young and Josh Gifkis there as part of the ACL crew.
This could be a pretty impressive core in the years to come.
They've already got experience into Jacob Blythe as well. I mean, there are a bunch of possibilities there. The Pies are 22.5-point favorites. I could only find that understandable because of the injury question marks. I expect Collingwood to just have no regard for anything in yellow this week. If Richmond win, how do you see it?
A bunch of veterans just kind of playing as their best selves. A bunch of those guys on the periphery getting in, and Taranto and Hopper just kind of lead from the middle.
unless you push Schultz more into the middle or you have some other players just be able to body up physically. I mean, I don't want them to demand too much of 399th gamer Scott Pendlebury, but they need something more physically at the center bounce.
We both know that when you get to actually have both Taranto and Hopper in there, that's a pretty good midfield combo.
The middle Saturday game, national broadcast for Australia and Fox Sports 2 for America. The Swans and Bulldogs at the SCG. The Swans coming off their 4th loss of the year. Those losses have come by a combined 10 points.
Bulldogs coming off of that 47-point win at Geelong, which honestly could have been by a lot more considering they were pretty inaccurate.
And it was already the largest road win at Geelong since, I think, 1971.
Yes, that's correct. These teams played back in round 11, and the Dogs actually put up a really good fight, especially considering how shorthanded they were. Anthony Scott got his first game of the year and got concussed in like the first couple minutes. Aaron Naughton hurt his MCL in the second quarter, and then Ed Richards, who had just been in a phenomenal stretch, got concussed early in the third. And then Brody Grundy took it to Tim English, and that was that.
It was the Richards injury that ended that game, and he had been one of the best midfielders in the entire league over the 2 to 3 weeks before that. You know, even if you consider going further back, all the way to the gather round against Geelong.
I mean, he'd started to become a more pronounced role, probably, what was it, like maybe around 8 or 9?
He got forward more in round 9 against Hawthorn, and then had his first octopus against Richmond.
The injury situation, unlike last time, though, should favor the Dogs. Sydney, in addition to still being without Justin McInerney, who we still don't have a timetable on for his PCL injury, now they lose Tom Papley for 4 to 6 weeks, so someone else will have to love a celebration. Dane Rampy's out 1 to 2 weeks with a calf injury. We'll see about Will Hayward, who hurt his ankle.
He played on despite clearly being hampered by that ankle injury and played damn well too. I really think that had Sydney won, it could have gone down as the Will Hayward game.
James Rowbottom, dealing with a cheekbone injury, could be back, and I think just the absence of both Rowbottom and McInerney really hurt because those are two guys that have been kind of filling in all the gaps for this team all year. Also, they had managed Callum Mills last week, which seemed odd. I assume that was something they had planned out long before. And then Angus Sheldrick and Sam Wicks have been good down on the twos, but the depth is being tested. But this has been a team that, you know, we've said at times, there are guys playing well down in that next crop that just don't have an opportunity. Well, here's your opportunity. Also, Sam Reed is officially retiring. I feel like that's worth noting.
Yeah, had another injury setback in the VFL and called it quits. A lot of good memories about his contributions to the 2012 flag team were brought up this week. We definitely want to just at least briefly mention him. I wish we had just some greater context outside of 2022 for our own memories of him. I think the biggest positive out of the younger or less experienced group this past week was Corey Warner working in tandem with his older brother. His spot's got to be solidified at this point with all the other injury concerns, but we're going to learn a lot about what the Swans have developed since the middle of last year when they were on that pretty bad stretch.
I think the most interesting possible in this week is Liam Jones, who's been out since round 16 with a knee injury. How do you incorporate both him and Rory Lobb, who's been fucking incredible defensively in the last few weeks? You know, does that come at Buku Kamas's expense? How do you... Well, thinking about it now, and this is the first time I've really thought about it, I would think it'll go well and they won't like step on each other's toes too much. Because you can let Jones roam and then let Lobb take the one-on-ones like he did with Jeremy Cameron this past week.
This could also be a case where you bump Buku to the sub.
As much as I don't want to wouldn't like that, especially after he played so well this week, I would understand it because if you want to go with a taller sub, you want someone who can play in both 50s, and he's got some speed and some explosiveness.
He could be an option there. I think part of it may bring Caleb Poulter further downfield.
Caleb Poulter's had a really quietly good couple of weeks and deserves much more credit and attention.
I wonder if Poulter being prominent could somehow keep another Caleb out of the lineup?
Yeah, I could see that because you think of Caleb Daniel as doing some work along the outside. I totally understand that. And this would be no fault of his own. Poulter's been really good lately.
What a great pickup who was delisted by Collingwood, got some VFL time, and then I believe was a midseason elevation. The Swans are still 14.5-point favorites. They're going to be playing with some anger, I think, but I could see the Bulldogs winning this by a sizable margin, even at the SCG. I think the range of outcomes for this game is pretty wide.
I would be surprised if the Swans don't win this game. I felt pretty confident that they're done losing.
Despite the injuries, I'm surprised.
But I could see this being really interesting. I think maybe this is where their close game luck turns around. Or it could just be one of those where like Heaney and Warner fuel a big blitz somewhere in, I'm going to say the third quarter.
The premiership quarter. James Jordan did not tag last week. Do you think he does this week? And if so, whom?
I would tag Ed Richards. You could tag Libba, you could tag Bond, but I think both of those are pretty good at fighting through it. I think it will be more of a challenge for Richards.
And meanwhile, I want to see somebody occupy Golden more. The Bulldogs have enough midfield depth to test that out, at least part-time, because you can't just let Golden go off the chain.
The final game of the round, is this the game I'm most excited for this round?
I'm pumped for Q Clash in a bit of an unorthodox way because I just want to see how Brisbane manage things in terms of tall defense. But if you're looking for teams that are on the outside, I mean, one that you can pretty much rule out because the maximum they can get to is 12.5, and the other who's really fighting to get in, Adelaide and Hawthorn could be something really interesting. They also have had some closer meetings in the past. Now, round 12 was not that. It was a game that the Hawks controlled the whole way as they won by 27.
I really wrote off the Crows after that one.
Dylan Moore had a career game with 5 goals and just being everywhere. The Hawks won in spite of Frostball. But I also think back to just some other really interesting meetings. There was a late Darcy Fogarty goal that won them a game. Anzac rounded Launceston. The prior Launceston meeting to that was Hawthorn winning despite Riley Philthorpe kicking 5 on debut and the Crows starting 15 straight.
Looking at Hawthorn's schedule, knowing that their next couple weeks are GWS in Canberra and then Carlton, I think this is a really important game on the path to 13 wins.
With their percentage, is 13 even enough?
I'm not sure, which is further adds to the importance of this one. I mean, they still could certainly fatten up on percentage, especially with a couple of the remaining games they've got. They have the rematch with North round 24. Not that there's any history of anything really surprising happening in round 24 in Tasmania. And they have Richmond round 23. So there's opportunities there. But these next 3 weeks are really about getting themselves in position so that if they can run through these final 2 games, they could be there. And despite having written off the Crows a while ago, I'm just enjoying how they're playing lately. They're incorporating all of their younger pieces that have actually gotten in. I think they should do more of that. Riley Philthorpe's getting time. Ben Keys is on a great roll. Darcy Fogarty's been doing really well. And they've become an enjoyable watch because at times this year, this team has been a very depressing watch.
This is a Fox Soccer Plus broadcast in the U.S., 2:10 a.m. Eastern Sunday morning, 11:10 p.m. Pacific Saturday night. It's 4:10 p.m. Eastern, 3:40 p.m. Central Australian time, so half an hour earlier than it may sometimes be. I also want to highlight Hugh Bond, who had a very good debut playing against Jack Higgins in the wet conditions, was quieter this past week trying to limit Zach Merritt. I mean, that's a tough task for anyone, let alone a second gamer. I'd like to see Bond go to Dylan Moore.
Yeah, keep giving him the opportunities. Your season's done for in terms of making finals. Get the young guys in, let them get tested. If they learn from a win, that's great. If they learn from a loss, they're still learning. Let the guys play and just give them their best shot. So, yeah, give them those tough matchups. Back them in.
Well, it's a much more fitting matchup than any of the core bids from a pure physicality standpoint. I mean, you could try with Day, but I don't think that would be the right scenario. I'm just thinking like somebody who's a big score generator like Jack Higgins is for the Saints. And I think Dylan Moore would be the best comparison for that if you're still looking for someone who's more of an inside player.
I'm a little concerned about Dylan Moore's workload, though, considering that J.P. Crawford's now out injured and he's not just going to be in a platoon role. He's going to be playing just about every day. He has started the last 4 games for the Mariners at 4 different positions. Crows could actually get some defensive reinforcements like Josh Worrell, who I really enjoyed earlier this year. Taylor Walker could come back. he was managed, and they did just fine without him. And maybe the most surprising possibility of all is that Matt Crouch might be able to play. I guess that AC joint injury wasn't season-ending after all.
It's going to be a team effort to make up for Jordan Dawson's absence regardless because he is concussed.
I would think it's going to rely on the combination of Mitch Hinge, Max Michelini, and Brody Smith, just from a ball movement standpoint.
If you're thinking about defensively, yes, but in the middle, more magnified stuff for Laird, maybe more of a push into the middle for Zach Taylor and Billy Dowling, and who knows what Dan Curtin could do if you give him the fucking chance, Knicks. Kicked 2 goals from 21 of the sample this past week. You have nothing to lose, and yet you probably still won't play Curtin.
More likely to play this week, him or Kynan Brown?
Kynan Brown.
More likely to be in the 22, because there's also always a good possibility Kynan Brown is just the sub.
Curtin more likely in the 22, Kynan more likely to be just the sub.
That's like exactly how I feel.
Not too many changes needed for Hawthorn, if any, although Jack Dunstan hasn't played in a couple weeks and you could always bring him back in, and Frenchie McKenzie was rested, and I've liked how he's gone for the most part in that midfield to half forward group. My biggest question mark about Hawthorn is honestly, how does Jai Nuka play, and has he Samsoned himself?
I mean, we saw it with Cam Guthrie. I think it's a very real concern. You know, with Gunston, with managing him, it was more like, the polite omission, whereas McKenzie, I think, was actual management, and I think you try to get him back in.
Don't do it at the expense of Josh Ward, though. After a solid start to the game against Frio and Launceston, he had a very efficient and very involved game against Collingwood, and Jack Ginnivan was hyping him up post-game.
I did not realize how good he was until I checked the numbers post-game.
To have that sort of efficiency, 10 scored involvements from 18 in that sort of weather, don't sleep on it.
Hawks favored by just 1.5 points. Considering the Dawson out, I think I'd probably push this out to more like a goal. But I could see this game going a lot of different ways. I think it's going to be a pretty fun round finale. I just think this is like a very watchable game. I feel like if it's not watchable and it's really ugly, it's that the Hawks just kind of roll them. I feel like any sort of close game or Crows win will be a fun watch.
Well, Crows win would be pretty enlightening as to what Hawthorn are still missing, as they have a pretty complete team. Now, our main character came from the Hawks this past week. There was absolutely no contest.
It was the obvious one. It was so obvious we didn't allow ourselves to even nominate him to be the main character. This week, I'll let you go first with your guess.
Josh Dacos will finally be him again.
I think our main character is going to come from the round finale. And I think there's going to be some crazy evil scientist to celebrate this game because he's a fan of both teams, is going to try to breed some sort of half hawk, half crow hybrid, and it's going to be an abomination that just wants to be put out of its misery.
Okay. If you have to pick a player, unless the scientist is a player,
one of the Q-Clash midfielders, whether that's Matt Rowell or like Dane Zorko.
Well, Zorko's had less of that midfield time.
Yeah, but he could still just, I guess even without Tuke Miller being involved, I think there's a good chance something happens.
By necessity, you'll have to be back more, probably.
That seems like the most likely game to produce a main character.
I can see it now, a Jed Walter and Dane Zorko wrestling match.
That would be fun, because it would be like, the pick on somebody your own size, except Zorko's the one who would probably start it and try to fight someone way bigger than him.
And probably still stand a good chance.
Like how the Pies are still a chance?
They are still a chance, JB.
Well, we will discuss if they are still a chance on Twitter at Americans Footy. I am individually at Castle Media.
His son is at CatNameGrind on Instagram. I'm at BenjaminHK01. Tune in again for our round recap, and if the Pies are still a chance, we'll let you know then too.